I'm just going to jump right in as we have a lot of content to cover today. So the primary objective for today's session is to give participants a demo of Cisco Umbrella. Before actually hopping into the technical demo, I wanted to go through some high-level Umbrella strategy information, so that just to ensure that everyone is level set on the positioning of Cisco Umbrella and what Cisco Umbrella does for us and the threat landscape, and specifically against ransomware attacks. So if we look at the positioning of Umbrella within the Cisco's ransomware defense strategy, as we can see, Umbrella is a cloud-based service, and our primary objective and strategy with Umbrella is DNS layer protection. So if we are able to thwart ransomware in the ransomware chain, if we're able to thwart via DNS resolution, then we're able to thwart the attack at several different levels. So if we receive a phishing attack and there's a URL, if we're blocked the DNS request when it's trying to do resolution of that URL, we're able to block it at that chain. We're also able to block it further downstream, even if that first attempt up to the URL was successful. If we're able to interrupt toward the attack at the command and control level, we'll also thwart it at that level. Another key component of Umbrella, as seen in this depiction, and one of the powers of Umbrella is not only is it giving you protection within the corporate walls, but also with the Umbrella roaming client. This is protection that will protect the endpoint when you're roaming. So when the user is outside of the corporate walls at a coffee shop or in their home office, Umbrella will continue to protect the client. And as I said, this is primarily based on DNS layer protection, but this will also thwart attacks on non-DNS resolution and purely IP-based attacks as well. And we'll get into that a little bit further as we go along. Since the session is being recorded, and we can also share this deck with anyone interested, I'm not going to go through this step by step, but I wanted to display this just so that I can go through each bullet point quickly, and then, as I said, you can go back to the recording and read into each of the granular focuses of Umbrella. But once again, we're talking about a first line of defense against threats, so that at the DNS layer, if we are clicking on a malicious URL, we will thwart the attack at the DNS layer. So that's where the first line of defense against threats is coming from. Also, the visibility and protection everywhere that I already covered. This isn't protection only within the corporate walls, but it's also the roaming capabilities is very powerful. Another very attractive component of Cisco Umbrella is the enterprise-wide deployment in minutes, and the reason that that's possible is really to deploy Umbrella after you have appropriate licensing. Is really the only deployment in this scenario is either changing your DHCP scope to use Umbrella DNS servers, or the typical scenario would be simply changing your DNS server to do external resolutions to a Umbrella DNS server instead of your ISP DNS server. Also, the intelligence to see attacks before they're launched. We'll go into this further as we get through our session today. But this is basically stating that we're not only doing protection against known malicious DNS names and resolutions, but we're using correlations so that based on correlated domains and register information and things like that, we're actually doing protection against day zero attacks as well by doing like guilt by association, and we'll get into that a little bit further. We're also going to cover today the integrations that amplify Umbrella in your existing investment. So this is talking about bringing intelligence from like Cisco Threat Grid or external threat feeds into the Umbrella solution. So not only are we getting attacks thwarted by information available to Cisco Talos, but we're also bringing in additional threat streams to prevent attacks. Just a very quick statement on this. This is a very powerful display of when a customer does a proof of value, which is very easy to do in an environment, once again, because of the simplicity of the Umbrella deployment. It's, in my opinion, kind of amazing. And Cisco statistics over their last 200, roughly, proof of values, this is what they were able to discover in environments in that 14-day period. So it's kind of startling when you look at this. So in those 14-day periods, they were able to discover ransomware on 82% of the networks that they deployed Umbrella against, and 50% of those networks were also being compromised by advanced persistent threats. And once again, we're seeing that just within that 14-day proof of value period. When we talked about Umbrella's defense against ransomware and some of the power of it, I thought bringing up a recent portrayal would be a powerful depiction of Umbrella ransomware detection and prevention. So if we look at this, if we look at the WannaCry ransomware attack that launched in the middle of May, I think everyone at this point is well aware that was based on a SMB vulnerability that Microsoft announced in March 14th, so a full, close to a full 2 months before the WannaCry attack actually swept the globe. So that was announced on March 14th. Not really specifically related to Umbrella, but just from a vision of Cisco threat intelligence in general. As soon as Microsoft announced that patch, Cisco had a IPS signature for related SMB vulnerabilities that same day. So if you're using one of their next generation firewalls or anything in their intelligence suite, they immediately made an IPS rule to protect users against that. When we get down to May 12th, this is actually, and we're depicting this here with Cisco Investigate, but primarily this is just stating that this was the day that shadow brokers launched the WannaCry attack on May 12th, and as we can see, that was at 7:30 UTC. So then if we draw in the Cisco Umbrella protection against that attack, it was a mere 13 minutes later. So as soon as the first known attack of WannaCry was launched in a 13-minute period, any Cisco Umbrella subscriber, any Cisco Umbrella organization would have been protected against that attack 13 minutes later by the introduction of that DNS resolution and the kill chain into Cisco Umbrella intelligence. So 13 minutes is rather compelling. So now I'm going to actually launch into the demo, and I've kind of laid out what I'm going to go through here, and I won't spend too much time going through the agenda, but just to paint it out for all the participants, I'm going to go through a security overview dashboard. So we'll look at some dashboards within Umbrella to see what kind of security analytics we're getting and reporting capabilities we're getting. Also go through how we provision networks within Umbrella. Additionally, we'll look at provisioning roaming computers. We'll look at a security activity dashboard. We'll also look at a destination report and look at the threat analytics and tracking by identity that we get through those reports. We'll also get into the Umbrella Investigate console, which is available at certain levels of Umbrella licensing. And the Investigate console, as we'll see later, is a great tool for SOC units and forensics units within organizations to give us a deeper level of inspection. We'll also go through identity reports, so looking at activity within the environment that Umbrella has captured based on users, based on computers, based on networks, and be able to drill in and to pivot based on those different entities. We'll also look at some of the integrations that I spoke on earlier with the threat piece coming in to Umbrella and the power of getting that additional threat intel. And then finally, we'll look at some policy and settings so that we can control what we're activating on a individual identity or individual user perspective. So with that, I'm going to hop over to our demo. And the first thing that I'm going to go into, when you immediately log into Umbrella, this would be the screen that you get in any successful login. And as I showed in the agenda, the first thing that I want to look at is simply the security overview. So as this drills in, we can see, and this is, we can adjust this by period. So initially, the default period is going to be a 24-hour period, but we can also adjust that to look at yesterday in totality, or we can look at the the last 70 or 30 calendar days. As we go through this, you can see immediately for the last 24 hours, once again, which is the focus, we can see how many total requests there are. So this isn't malicious activity, but this is just our total activity. And then we can also immediately look in and drill into at a specific time period. So at the 5 a.m. Time period, we can see that we had a total of 229 blocks through Umbrella during that single hour period. And these all block requests are not necessarily malicious activity. This is all block requests. So this could be based on if we're filtering adult content or something like that, or gambling sites, that would also be included in the block request. And then if we actually want to look at potentially malicious activity, so these are users that are reaching out to no malicious domains, then this is, or possibly we get something that has malware infection embedded into the code, into the web page. This is the threat landscape and the security blocks that we received in the environment over that last past hour. If we go up down and we look at the most security blocks, it starts to get into, you can see that we could actually differentiate this by destination or by identity or by type. So initially it gives us an identity. So this is giving us information. If we wanted to drill into one of these individual computers, we could see the threat activity for individual identities. If we go to destinations, we could also see the most frequent the malicious activity that we're seeing over the period. So 193 requests, and that over the last 24 hours went to that very long domain name. Or the second one down, we can see possibly some malicious activity going to a Chinese website. And then finally, we can also look at by type. So typically what we would see in a production environment here is we would see domain block requests, which are DNS requests that are blocked. And we also would see URL information. So URLs, if we turn on intelligent proxy, which I'll cover later, but by doing recursive DNS initiation, we're also looking at all URL requests. So if we had the intelligent proxy shown, we would also have a differentiation with that by type. If we go down a little bit further in this screen, we can also look at essentially our current deployment. So as we can see here, we have active networks. So in this case, there's just one active network within this demo environment. We can also see quickly the number of active roaming clients. So these are clients that are currently off-premise, and we can also look at our currently deployed virtual appliances, and I'll cover this a little bit later, but a virtual appliance is basically a virtual machine that would be employed into a customer environment so that we could get contextual information based on Active Directory to do user association. And that's how we would get, if we look at identities, we would be able to do association into individual users and not just IP addresses. So to continue, the next thing that I want to look at, going back to our agenda, is now that we've looked at the overview screen where you can kind of get a sense of the activity within your environment, I also wanted to drill into identities. So as I go over to the identity pane and I look at internal networks, we can see the internal networks that have been manually configured within this environment. So the power of this internal networks capability is, once again, essentially just identity. So if we wanted to do focus reports just based on networks, so in other words, if we have a individual subnet of this 172.16 subnet, then if we wanted to drill into reports based on human resources, now that we have that contextual information, we could look at malicious activity and malicious attempts based on the department. Or more precisely, the subnet, and that's essentially the reason that we would use internal networks, is once again just giving us some identity, contextual information. I could also, if I go over to settings and go down to sites in Active Directory, once again for contextual information, this is that virtual appliance integration with local AD servers. And once again, the reason that we would want to do this is if we wanted to look at individual activity for Scott Carruthers within the threat landscape or within our reports, we can do that on an identity-based information as well. Also, from an identity perspective, I also wanted to show the roaming client or the roaming computers depiction. So this is all of our roaming users within the environment. So this is when I speak of roaming users, and we'll see this in a little bit. This is typically a client install that integrates with AnyConnect, but also if you're using a different VPN solution, is certainly not limited to only to Cisco AnyConnect users, but we can also do a non-AnyConnect client-based install so that we have roaming client protection irregardless of what technology they're using on the endpoint. So if I look at the roaming computers, essentially what we're seeing here is we're seeing not only activity on the corporate network, but we're also seeing all, if I go back to identities and look at, in totality, the different entities that exist within the Umbrella solution, we not only have roaming computers, and if we already looked at the internal networks, but we also have network devices. So this is a situation where you have remote offices that are ingesting Umbrella through a ISR 4000 integration. And this is useful for remote sites that have kind of fluctuating user counts. So we can also deploy Umbrella on a ISR 4000 router at a remote office. And then the telemetry at that point is we're getting protection within the corporate headquarters. We're also getting telemetry and information and protection for roaming clients. And then also through the ISR deployment at remote offices, if that's applicable to your environment, we're also getting protection at those remote offices as well. So for a moment, I want to switch back to our slide deck. And this isn't really possible to simulate real time, so I just kind of wanted to give a depiction of some of our roaming client protection. So if I play this video, I'll walk us through what we're seeing. So this is basically a depiction that even though the VPN is turned off, so you can see that we're not currently connected, the off-net user is going to automatically be protected by Umbrella without any interaction. So if we drill into an example of this, a user tried to open an email that had a malicious macro embedded malicious macro in Microsoft Word, and as they ingest that, the malicious actor is trying to go through a key exchange for ransomware. And finally, because Open DNS or Cisco Umbrella blocked that, they weren't able to do that key exchange, and we blocked it at that level. Now we're also getting a further depiction of the roaming client when they click on a malicious URL, and this is basically the experience that they would get from Cisco Umbrella. Because we block it at the DNS level, they're not able to, the threat is not able to progress past that point. So it's kind of just a quick depiction of the experience for the remote user. It's completely non-intrusive. It doesn't take any user action. It's basically just the Cisco Umbrella roaming client will be offer that protection consistently, whether they're on net or off net. So it's kind of just a quick depiction of how seamless that is. So now returning back to our demo, I also wanted to look at this security activity dashboard. So if I go into reporting and I go into security activity, one of the things that we could have done if that example attack was actually real and that actually happened in this environment, I would have been able to very quickly go into security activity and be able to see that attack and seeing what other users possibly might be visiting that URL. And then we can get some telemetry and information on how prevalent the attack appears to be in the organization. Since that wasn't actually launched from our demo environment, I'm kind of just going to go through a role-playing exercise where we're going to look at similar information that wasn't specifically related to that attack. So if I click on any of the items within the security activity screen, and I click on a specific hour, since we're doing it a 24-hour measurement and it's broken down hourly, this gives us activity information for the last 24 hours. So just so that we're only looking at interesting information, so this is logging all DNS, and if we had URL intelligent proxy turned on, also show us URL and DNS information. But obviously, it's more interesting if we looked at blocked information. So I'm going to go ahead and apply a filter so that we're just looking at blocked attempts. Another thing to draw note of here is not only can we filter based on allowed or blocked or proxied information, but we can also filter this down based on the request type. So we could filter this down based on if we want to look at DNS requests, if we want to look at URL requests, or if we want to look at IP requests. The last option in that is of interest, and it's an area that's not typically highlighted with Cisco Umbrella, but we need to understand that even though the DNS level protection is what's highlighted most often with Cisco Umbrella, it also, based on the roaming client, whether you're on net or off net, that local client will also give you IP-based protection. So even if malicious actors pivot and they start sending URLs that do not require any DNS resolution, we're still able to protect at the IP layer. And if we were doing that in this demo environment, we could just focus on the kind of threats that were preventing at that level. But in this environment, it's most interesting to look at DNS level attacks. So if I wanted to drill in and actually look at something in this environment, I could go into any of the specific identities and get information based on the telemetry and the requests that user has been involved in the last 24 hours. So this is kind of giving us a depiction of all those attacks. But also if we go back and we look at this security activity and we drill into a little delay. If we go back into security activity, it redraws. Okay, so slight delay there. So I'm going to hop back into the same hour period that I was looking at prior. It's also useful if we know that there's a malicious domain. It's also very interesting to look from a destination perspective. So if we know like something like WannaCry is out there and that there's a kill switch and we want to see how many users are clicking on that malicious kill chain URL, we can also look at the destination. And for some reason in this demo environment, whenever I click on the destination out of the activity report, it seems to struggle, but I can get to same information. For some reason there all of a sudden seems to be a considerable delay in this demo environment. If I go into activity and I had a save search, if I want to look at something that we know that there was malicious activity from our past activity searches based on this destination in China. And if I go into that and then I look at the destination, this time it draws in. And as you can see from this, it's giving us a depiction of all the activity to that URL within that period. Another kind of natural segue in this is to drill further into investigate. So I'm immediately getting this level of telemetry and information, and we can look at the users that visited that site and the activity over the last 24 hours. But if we're looking for a more sophisticated analysis, we can also go into investigate. And this is, as I described in the very beginning, is kind of our tool for our SOC teams or for our security analysts, where they can go into that domain and they can look at who has information to see who is hosting the domain, and we can also see based on the register of that server or of that DNS domain name, we can also look at other known malicious URLs within that same register. And then we can also look at associated samples. So these are SHA or MD5 hashing values for known malicious file samples from that malicious actor, along with a lot of other information. So you can see the power of investigate if we really want to get in to look at and really do some forensics. That's a great tool. The other thing I get out of the demo, I also want to talk about the power of Cisco Umbrella. in looking at previously unknown malicious domains. So currently we're looking at the co-occurrence model within Cisco Umbrella. So basically what this is based on the vast amount of information that the Cisco intelligence team is gathering daily, we're doing co-occurrence. So if somebody originally launched a URL to x.com, based on that vast volume of information and machine learning, we can also do co-occurrence investigations to know that when a user clicked on x.com, typically that was associated further down the line in the attack chain with c.com or d.com. And then not only would we be blocking that initial known malicious domain, but we would also be blocking on c.com and d.com through a guild by association or a co-occurrence model. And then I get into a little bit more in this, and this is some of the power of Umbrella is doing that kind of advanced machine learning and analysis where we're getting full visibility, not of only known attacks, but we're also looking at the threat landscape as we progress over time. So that guild by association and known bad IP addresses and domain names. And we're also looking at ASNs for domain providers and trying to do some guild by association, looking at the different registers to those associated ASNs. And then this is basically, that telemetry that we get out of that just based on a initial top-level pre-class .su domain. We're doing guild by association and advanced machine learning to then also convict a number of other domain names and IP addresses. And then, this is the kind of telemetry and forward thinking that Umbrella provides us with. And that's kind of what, once again, if you go back and look at this recording and look through these in totality, these are the different sources of intelligence that Cisco Umbrella is giving us to do that guild by association. And our goal here is we're also trying to do isolation of where the attacks are staged. So we're not just, once again, looking at a known malicious domain, but we're going back to the origination source and looking at other activity that's coming from that source to see where that attack is staged and try to do proactive guild rankings based on other known vectors coming out of that same attack surface. And also, you read through this yourself, but this is kind of a umbrella summarization of some of the things that we've already covered and some of the things that I mentioned in the beginning that we can mitigate remediation costs by doing a first layer of defense, a very simplistic deployment, but it's giving us a ton of information, and 90% of malware and ransomware that were introduced last year were using some kind of DNS resolution. So even though it's very simplistic, customers find it to be highly effective. Going back to those statistics that I showed just from a proof of value perspective, the kind of threat intel that we're getting, and also the increased visibility not only into internet activity within the corporate walls, but from all locations and from all users that are using the roaming client, and also getting some visibility into the cloud apps that are being used in the organization by doing intelligent proxy and sending all web URL recursive DNS through Umbrella as well. So I was actually going to go through a couple of other reports, but I see we're up against the clock. I'll always make the offer that I would love to do one-on-one sessions with Umbrella, where you could, ask any questions that you would like. I can get deeper into the philosophies and the technologies behind Umbrella. I was also going to look at some of the integrations and the threat feeds that you can bring into Umbrella and where we configure those within the Umbrella interface, and also look at some of the individual policies and settings that we can do for individual users and groups. But just for the sake of time today, I will leave it at that. But like I said, I would love to get into some deeper dive personal sessions with your organizations in the future.